The Galactic Survival Academy occupied a small moon in the Tertius system, which was ironic, considering survival training shouldn't require an entire celestial body, but the galaxy's military complex had credits to burn and egos to massage. For 300 cycles, the Academy had churned out competent officers who could theoretically survive hostile environments, though most would never face anything more threatening than a malfunctioning climate control system on a luxury cruiser. Still, tradition demanded that every officer candidate prove they could endure at least one standard galactic week in wilderness conditions, armed with nothing but their wits and approximately 40 kilograms of survival technology. The current crop of cadets represented 7 species, each convinced their particular evolutionary path had rendered them superior to primitive survival concerns. The Valkyrie, with their crystalline neural matrices, could calculate optimal shelter trajectories in milliseconds. The Thornback delegation boasted dermal armor that regulated temperature automatically. Even the Whisper folk, those wispy hydrogen breathers, had brought atmosphere generators small enough to fit in a chest pocket. Everyone came prepared, which was precisely the problem the Academy's sadistic training coordinators loved to exploit. Marcus Webb stood at the edge of the deployment zone, watching his fellow cadets obsessively check their gear for the 9th time in as many minutes. The human contingent, this cycle, consisted solely of him, which wasn't unusual. Humanity's recent admission to the galactic community meant their representation in military programs remained sparse. Most species still viewed humans as the new neighbors who'd just moved into the cosmic cul-de-sac, probably nice enough but not yet proven. Marcus didn't mind the isolation. He'd grown up in the Cascadian wilderness back on Earth, where proving yourself meant catching dinner, not impressing committees. Final equipment verification, barked Instructor Kickstal, a Thornback whose voice could strip paint at 30 meters. You will be deployed to Zone 7 Auric, a temperate forest environment with minimal hostile fauna. Your objective is simple: survive 72 hours with your issued gear. Extraction occurs at the designated coordinates. Failure to reach extraction results in automatic disqualification from the program. The cadets nodded with the confidence of people who'd never actually been inconvenienced. Their packs bulged with emergency shelters, protein synthesizers, water purification tablets, fire-starting plasma torches, multi-tools that could probably perform dental surgery, and enough redundant backup systems to make a starship engineer weep with envy. Marcus's pack, by comparison, looked anemic. He'd brought a knife, a metal canteen, a tarp, and 50 meters of paracord. His Valkyrie teammate, a geometric entity named Zixthar, had actually laughed when comparing their equipment, which sounded like wind chimes falling downstairs. You understand we will be graded on efficiency and resourcefulness, yes? Zixthar had asked, concern vibrating through their crystalline structure. Yeah, I got the brief, Marcus replied, adjusting his pack straps. The transport deposited them in Zone 7 Auric, precisely at local dawn, then departed with the finality of a door slamming before a test. The forest stretched endlessly in all directions, dense with vegetation that looked almost Earth-like if you ignored the purple undertones and the way some leaves tracked movement. Breathable atmosphere, comfortable temperature, gentle terrain. By galactic standards, this was a vacation resort with trees. The 8-member cadet team immediately established a perimeter and began unpacking equipment with practiced efficiency. Zixthar deployed the atmospheric analyzer. Krevix, a Thornback built like an organic tank, activated the terrain mapper. The 2 Whisperfolk cadets, Syl and Mur, assembled their portable atmosphere generator, while the others created an inventory of shared resources. Everything proceeded according to protocol, which should have been Marcus's first warning that the universe was winding up for a punchline. 20 minutes into their organized setup, Krevix made a sound that translated roughly to extreme biological distress. The equipment cache is gone. Everyone stopped. Froze really in that particular way people do when their brain refuses to process catastrophic information. Marcus looked up from where he'd been examining some promising dry tinder and saw genuine panic spreading through the group like a computer virus. "Define gone," Zixter said, their crystalline structure refracting light in agitated patterns. "Gone. Absent. Not present in this dimensional coordinate." Krevix tore through the supply containers with increasing desperation. The backup packs, the emergency cache, all secondary equipment. Vanished. The Whisper folk checked their atmosphere generator. Dead. The power cells had been replaced with identical-looking duds. Zixter's analyzer displayed nothing but error codes. One by one, every piece of technological assistance revealed itself as either missing, deactivated, or cleverly sabotaged. Someone had systematically stripped them of every advantage except their basic packs, and even those had been compromised. The fancy multi-tools, gone. Plasma torches, mysteriously absent. Emergency rations, replaced with empty wrappers in a move that seemed personally offensive. "This is a training modification," Krevix announced, though his voice carried more hope than certainty. "An additional challenge parameter." "An illegal one," Zixter countered. "Protocols require minimum equipment standards." "Protocols also require adaptability," said Threx, a Valkyrie whose crystalline structure pulsed with what Marcus had learned to recognize as intellectual superiority. "Obviously, this tests our ability to function without technological support." "Technological support is literally the foundation of civilization," Syl whispered, their gaseous form contracting with distress. "Without our generator, we have maybe 40 hours before atmospheric incompatibility becomes critical." The group spiraled into debate, then argument, then something approaching group panic. They'd trained for survival with equipment, not despite it. Take away a Valkyrie's computational ability, and they became very efficient rocks. Remove a Thornback's mapping technology, and they were just heavy. The Whisper folk faced an actual existential threat without their breathing apparatus. Even the other species, less immediately endangered, found themselves intellectually stranded. Their entire survival strategy had been built on a foundation that had just evaporated. Marcus, meanwhile, had wandered 30 meters from camp and started breaking branches. "What is the human doing?" Mert asked, their form flickering with confusion. Zixter calculated probable outcomes for 1.3 seconds before admitting defeat. "Unknown. His actions appear random." Marcus wasn't being random, he was being efficient. The forest provided everything needed for survival, if you knew what to look for, and he'd spent his childhood learning what to look for. While the aliens debated communication protocols for contacting the Academy, Marcus identified a suitable campsite, elevated enough to avoid water collection, near a stream but not too near, with natural windbreak and good drainage. While they discussed theoretical approaches to shelter construction, he gathered firewood, separating it into categories they didn't have words for: tinder, kindling, fuel. "Perhaps we should establish a plan," Krevix suggested, trying to reassert command structure. "Delegate responsibilities according to capability." "Excellent proposal," Threx agreed. "Zixter and I can calculate optimal resource distribution algorithms. Krevix, you and the others could begin manual resource collection." "With what tools?" Syl whispered, which was a fair point. "Improvised implements. Surely we can devise primitive instruments. The word primitive hung in the air like an insult to their collective advancement. 300 cycles of galactic civilization, countless technological marvels, and they'd been reduced to considering sharp rocks. The psychological blow hit harder than any physical challenge could. Marcus returned to the group carrying an armload of materials and began arranging them in a small cleared area. The aliens watched with the fascination of anthropologists observing a barely contacted species, which, to be fair, wasn't far from their actual attitude. "Webb, what are you doing?" Krevix asked. "Making fire," Marcus replied, as if this explained everything. "With what ignition source?" "Friction." Zixthar's crystalline structure flickered in a pattern that suggested polite skepticism. "Friction produces heat." "Yes, but insufficient for combustion ignition in atmospheric conditions." "Wanna bet?" Marcus had prepared a bow drill set, a spindle of dry softwood, a fireboard with a carved notch, a handhold stone, and a bow strung with paracord. The aliens gathered closer, their various sensory organs focused on this apparent exercise in futility. They'd all studied primitive civilizations academically. They knew early tool use, understood basic physics, but knowing something theoretically and watching it happen in real time occupied very different cognitive spaces. He positioned the fireboard, placed a nest of shredded bark nearby, and began working the bow. Back and forth, steady pressure, the spindle spinning against the board. Smoke appeared within 30 seconds. The aliens leaned in, multiple species worth of attention, focused on a small piece of wood and some string. Marcus maintained rhythm, increased pressure, and coaxed the friction into producing a tiny ember that glowed like a miniature star in the wood dust collecting in the fireboard's notch. "Impossible," Thrix calculated. "The energy transfer coefficient is insufficient for the ember transferred to the tinder nest." Marcus blew on it gently, oxygen feeding the reaction, and the nest burst into flame with a cheerful crackle that sounded like the universe laughing at several thousand years of alien technological development. "By the void," Krevix breathed, which was the Thornback equivalent of profound religious experience. Marcus fed the flame carefully, graduating from tinder to kindling to fuel wood, building a fire that would have made his grandfather proud, and apparently caused several aliens to question their entire worldview. Within minutes, a proper campfire burned in a ring of stones, producing heat, light, and a psychological anchor point that the group desperately needed. "How did you do that?" Syl whispered, their gaseous form drawn toward the warmth. "Friction creates heat. Heat creates ember. Ember creates fire. Same physics everywhere." Marcus arranged larger logs around the fire. "We'll need to maintain this constantly. Keep a watch rotation. Make sure it doesn't go out." "We can do that," Mer said quickly, as if afraid this magical fire might disappear if they didn't show proper appreciation. Zixar approached the flames with scientific curiosity, extending a crystalline tendril toward the heat. "The energy output is substantial, inefficient compared to plasma generation, but requiring no technological input. Fascinating." "It's just fire," Marcus said, though he smiled slightly. "Now we need shelter." "Gonna rain tonight?" "Negative," Threx countered. "Atmospheric analysis indicates 0 precipitation probability." "Your atmospheric analyzer is dead, remember?" Marcus pointed at the sky, where high clouds had begun moving in from the west. "See those? That's your precipitation probability." Before anyone could argue further, Marcus began construction. He'd spotted a fallen tree earlier, perfectly positioned between two standing trunks. Using it as a ridgepole, he began layering branches in an overlapping pattern, creating a slanted shelter structure. The aliens watched with increasing fascination as the shelter took shape, each branch deliberately placed to shed water, each layer adding insulation and protection. The structural integrity appears sound, Zixar observed, running calculations. Load distribution follows logical engineering principles. It's a lean-to, Marcus explained, weaving smaller branches through the larger framework. Nothing fancy, but it'll keep us dry and break the wind. Debris shelter would be warmer, but takes longer. How long will this construction require? Krevix asked. Marcus checked the sun's position. Hour maybe, less if you help. They helped, though their assistance was often more enthusiastic than skilled. Thornbacks turned out to be excellent at hauling heavy branches, but terrible at delicate placement. The Valkyrie could calculate perfect branch angles, but lacked appendages for actual construction. The Whisperfolk proved surprisingly adept at stuffing insulating material into gaps, their gaseous forms allowing them to identify every draft. Working together, the shelter came together faster than Marcus's estimate, a hybrid structure combining human experience with alien effort. By the time they'd packed the exterior with leaves and moss for additional insulation, the first drops of rain began falling. The aliens filed into the shelter with the relief of people who'd just discovered their spaceship, had emergency oxygen after all. The rain increased to a steady downpour, drumming on the leaf-covered roof while inside. The team stayed dry and increasingly contemplative. This should not be possible, Threx muttered, his crystalline structure dimming in a way that suggested deep thought. We are the advanced species. We have computational abilities, technological mastery, centuries of accumulated knowledge. And yet, Zixar added quietly, the human constructed survival infrastructure in under 2 hours, using materials found within 50 meters. Marcus, meanwhile, had moved back into the rain and was working on the next problem. Water. The stream he'd noted earlier ran clear and cold about 20 meters downslope. He filled his canteen, carried it back to the fire, and began the laborious process of boiling water in a container that hadn't been designed for cooking. It required patience, careful heat management, and a complete absence of the instant gratification that technology provided. Krevix watched the water slowly heat and asked the question clearly bothering everyone, why do humans still know these things? Your species has achieved spaceflight, quantum computation, medical technology that rivals the Valkyrie. Why maintain primitive survival knowledge? Marcus shrugged, testing the water temperature with a finger. Because technology fails. Ships crash, equipment breaks, situations change. My grandfather used to say that knowledge weighs nothing but saves everything. Besides, it's not primitive, it's fundamental. Fire is fire, whether you make it with plasma torch or friction. Understanding the principle matters more than the tool. A philosophical position, Threx calculated. A practical one, Marcus corrected. We've got 50 hours until extraction. No technology, no rescue calls, just us and the environment. So we work with what's here. Speaking of which, anyone know if those purple-leaved plants near the stream are edible? The aliens exchanged glances, a complicated gesture involving multiple sensory organs and species. None of them knew. Their equipment would have told them. Their databases would have provided nutritional analyses, toxicity warnings, preparation methods. Without technology, they were functionally illiterate in the language of the natural world. Marcus spent the next hour teaching impromptu botany. He explained identification techniques, testing methods, the universal principles of finding safe food. The aliens absorbed information with the desperate intensity of students who just realized the final exam covered material they'd never studied. Zixthar calculated and categorized. Krevix memorized through repetition. The Whisper folk observed and learned through osmosis, literally absorbing information from atmospheric particles. By the 3-hour mark since their equipment vanished, Camp Webb had evolved into a functional survival base. Fire burned steadily in a protected pit. The shelter kept 8 beings dry despite ongoing rain. Boiled water cooled in containers improvised from broad leaves. Edible plants had been gathered and organized. A basic latrine had been established downwind and downhill. Firewood stood stacked and drying under a secondary shelter. The camp looked like something from a historical recreation, which, considering the galactic audience, it basically was. Instructor Kickstall observed from her concealed position 200 meters away, recording everything through passive sensors that couldn't be detected or compromised. The Academy's training modification had been her idea: strip the cadets of technological dependence and see who adapted. Most teams were currently huddled in inadequate shelters, debating theories of survival while slowly getting hypothermic. 3 groups had already activated emergency beacons, accepting disqualification over discomfort. But Team 7 Auric had a human, and the human had apparently read the assignment differently than everyone else. Kickstall watched Marcus demonstrate knot-tying techniques to a fascinated Valkyrie, explaining load distribution and structural integrity in terms that bridged technological and natural principles. The human hadn't just survived the modification. He'd thrived in it, and more importantly, he'd brought his team along. "Command, this is Observer 7, Kickstall transmitted on encrypted channels. You need to see this." The Academy's command staff reviewed the footage with the bemused confusion of people watching their carefully designed test get casually dismantled. They'd expected struggle, conflict, eventual adaptation after significant hardship. Instead, they got a human building a civilization in 3 hours while teaching aliens to appreciate the beauty of properly arranged firewood. "Should we extract them early?" someone suggested. "Negative," the Academy commandant decided. "Let's see how far this goes." Back at camp, Marcus had moved on to food preparation. The edible plants needed proper handling, and several root vegetables required cooking to break down difficult compounds. He'd constructed a basic earth oven using stones from the stream, heated them in the fire, and created a cooking environment that made the aliens reconsider everything they thought they knew about food preparation. "This is actually pleasant," Syl whispered, their gaseous form hovering near the fire's warmth. "Without our generator, we expected suffering. Instead, we have heat, shelter, food, and water. The human created comfort from nothing." "Not nothing," Marcus corrected, turning roots in the earth oven. "From everything. The forest provides. You just have to know the language." "We should learn this language," Zixthar decided, their crystalline structure pulsing with determination. "This knowledge represents a fundamental gap in our education." Krevix rumbled agreement. His massive form relaxed in a way it hadn't been since deployment. "The Thornback military academies teach combat strategy technology, but not this, not survival without support systems. Most species don't need it." Threx pointed out. "We have technology. Until we don't," Marcus said simply, and that statement hung in the humid air like prophecy. They spent the evening around the fire, dry in their shelter while rain continued outside. Marcus taught fire maintenance, explaining the relationship between wood type, oxygen flow, and heat production. He demonstrated shelter improvements, showed them how to create natural cordage from plant fibers, explained the principles of thermal layering and wind protection. The aliens learned with the intensity of people who'd discovered a treasure map to a continent they hadn't known existed. Somewhere around hour 4 of the modification, Team 7 Auric stopped being a collection of individuals trying to survive and became an actual functioning unit. The Valkyrie calculated optimal firewood arrangements. The Thornbacks gathered materials with systematic efficiency. The Whisper folk became expert fire tenders, their gaseous forms allowing precise oxygen control. Everyone contributed, everyone learned, and the camp improved exponentially as knowledge spread through the group. By nightfall, they had everything needed for comfortable survival: fire, shelter, water, food, and most importantly, confidence. The aliens who'd panicked that morning now sat around the fire exchanging survival techniques they'd learned, building on Marcus's foundation with their own observations and innovations. Krevix had discovered that Thornback dermal armor could be used to crack tough nuts. Zixthar realized their crystalline structure could focus moonlight for navigation. The Whisper folk found they could detect weather changes through atmospheric pressure sensitivity. "We are primitives," Threx announced suddenly, his crystalline structure gleaming in firelight. Not in the derogatory sense, in the original sense. Primary, fundamental. "We have rediscovered base principles." "You sound like a philosophy instructor," Krevix rumbled, but his tone carried amusement rather than criticism. "I sound like someone who just learned that evolution didn't remove survival instincts, just buried them under convenience layers." Marcus smiled, adding wood to the fire with practiced efficiency. "My grandfather had a saying, civilization is 3 meals away from collapse, but wilderness skills are forever. Technology extends our reach, but knowledge extends our survival." When Instructor Kickstall finally emerged from concealment the next morning, she found a camp that looked like it had been established for days rather than hours. The fire burned steadily, maintained through the night by a rotation system. Breakfast cooked on heated stones. Water boiled in leaf containers. The shelter had been expanded and improved, now sporting a weatherproof design that several alien engineers would later study for efficiency principles. "Team 7 Auric," Kickstall announced, her voice carrying across the organized camp. "Status report." Krevix stood, speaking for the group. "Instructor, all team members accounted for and in good health. Camp established with fire, shelter, water, and food sources secured. Ready to continue the 72-hour survival exercise." Kickstall walked through the camp, her trained eye noting every detail. The fire pit showed proper construction. The shelter demonstrated sound engineering adapted to local materials. Food storage followed contamination prevention protocols despite lacking any storage technology. Even the latrine placement showed sophisticated understanding of hygiene and environmental impact. "Explain your adaptation strategy," she ordered. The team exchanged glances before Zixthar spoke. "We utilized available human survival knowledge to compensate for equipment loss. Webb provided instruction in fundamental survival techniques. We adapted these techniques using our species' natural abilities. The result exceeded anticipated survival parameters." Webb Kickstall turned to Marcus. "You received the same compromised equipment as everyone else. How did you prepare for this scenario?" "Didn't prepare for this specifically, Instructor. Just knew how to survive without tech." Marcus gestured at the forest. "This environment provides everything needed. Just takes knowledge and work." Kickstall's expression, difficult to read on a Thornback face, might have been respect. "Your team has achieved in 12 hours what most teams fail to accomplish in 3 days. Food, fire, shelter, water, all secured through improvised methods. Impressive. Will we be extracted early?" Mer asked, their form flickering with concern. "Negative. You will complete the full exercise. However, you will also receive additional tasking. Kickstal pulled out a data pad, one of the few pieces of technology she'd kept functional. Other teams are struggling. You will document your techniques for Academy instructional materials. Consider it leadership training. They spent the next 2 days not just surviving but thriving, documenting everything they'd learned. Marcus taught advanced techniques, trap construction for catching game, methods for preserving food without refrigeration, navigation using natural indicators, emergency medical care using plant materials. The aliens absorbed it all, adding their own innovations and perspectives, creating a hybrid survival knowledge base that bridged technological and natural approaches. Other teams, extracted early after activating emergency beacons or failing basic survival parameters, heard rumors about Team 7 Auric, the human who'd built fire from sticks. The mixed species group living comfortably in a forest that had defeated pure-strain military cadets. By the time extraction arrived at the 72-hour mark, Camp Webb had become legendary. The extraction shuttle pilot actually laughed when she saw the camp. Command said you'd adapted well, didn't mention you'd built a resort. They broke camp systematically, scattering the fire, dismantling the shelter, leaving the forest as they'd found it. Marcus insisted on the cleanup, explaining principles of environmental stewardship that made several aliens reconsider their species' entire approach to planetary resource management. Back at the Academy, their debrief lasted 6 hours. Instructors asked detailed questions about every technique, every adaptation, every innovation. The footage from Kickstal's observation became required viewing for all future cadet classes. Marcus's demonstration of friction fire starting got replayed so many times, it became a meme in the Academy's social networks, usually captioned with variations of "when the human casual shows you that your entire civilization is soft." The Commandant herself attended their final evaluation session, a rare honor that made even Kravix nervous. She reviewed their performance metrics, watched key footage segments, and then fixed Marcus with a stare that could probably melt hull plating. "Cadet Webb, your performance exceeded all parameters. You not only survived equipment loss but established a thriving camp and educated your team in fundamental survival skills. Explain your thought process." Marcus considered his answer carefully. "Ma'am, when the equipment disappeared, everyone panicked because they'd lost their tools. I saw it differently. We hadn't lost tools, we'd gained a challenge. The forest became our equipment, knowledge became our technology. The team became our support system. We just had to connect the pieces." "A practical philosophy," the Commandant observed. "Tell me, do all humans maintain these skills?" "No, ma'am, but enough of us do that we remember we can survive without the things we've built. Technology serves us, we don't serve it." The Commandant nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. "The galactic community has much to learn from humanity, it seems." Dismissed. Team 7 Auric graduated top of their class, which surprised nobody who'd watched the footage. They went on to distinguished careers, and all of them maintained their survival skills, practicing regularly and teaching others. Zixthar eventually wrote a groundbreaking treatise on adaptive survival techniques that became standard reading at military academies across 3 sectors. Kravix commanded a planetary garrison and personally ensured all his troops could build fire without technology. The Whisper folk established survival training programs for their entire species, recognizing the dangerous gap in their education. Marcus himself became an instructor at the Academy, teaching cross-species survival techniques to cadets who arrived convinced their technology made them invincible. His classes had the highest passage rates and the highest satisfaction scores, probably because he spent less time lecturing and more time making privileged aliens build shelters in the rain. The equipment compromise incident, as it became officially known, transformed Academy training protocols. Every cadet class now faced a mandatory no-technology survival exercise. The failure rate initially approached 80% before dropping as the culture shifted, as species learned that advancement meant building on fundamentals rather than abandoning them. And in forests across training worlds, alien cadets learned to make fire from friction, to build shelter from branches, to find food in plants, and to appreciate the particular kind of knowledge that weighs nothing but saves everything. They learned that primitive didn't mean inferior, that technology could enhance but shouldn't replace understanding, and that sometimes the most advanced thing you could do was remember how to survive with nothing but your hands and your brain. The galaxy had spent millennia building upward, reaching for stars and achievements, constructing towers of technology that stretched beyond imagination. They'd just forgotten to maintain the foundation. One human with a knife and some knowledge had reminded them that the ground floor still mattered, that survival started with fundamentals, and that you couldn't really call yourself advanced if you couldn't build a fire in the rain. Somewhere, Marcus's grandfather would have laughed at the cosmic irony. It took traveling to the stars for humanity to teach aliens about Earth. But then again, that's what humans did best. They adapted, survived, and showed everyone else that the newest neighbors in the cosmic cul-de-sac had a few things worth learning, even if those things predated spaceflight by several 100,000 years. The lesson, ultimately, was simple: technology fails, but knowledge persists. And when everything else disappears, the person who knows how to make fire from sticks becomes the most valuable being in the galaxy, regardless of how many tentacles, crystalline nodes, or gaseous forms surround them. Civilization, it turned out, really was just camping with better marketing.